Hey everybody, Tactic Angel here for another ship review. We're talking World of Warships Legends, and of course we're playing on the PlayStation 4. Before I really get started on this, I want to give a big shout out to my buddy Savo for making this video possible. So what we're talking about today is the USS Indianapolis, named after a town in Indiana where apparently they drive cars around really fast. The Indianapolis is the second of the Portland-class cruisers built for the United States Navy, and undoubtedly the more famous of the two. Once again, no points for guessing what the other ship in the Portland class was. First, a little history. Why was the Indianapolis so famous? Well, a few reasons. For one, it was active during almost the entirety of the Pacific Campaign, supporting the Allied island hopping campaigns like so many other ships, but in 1945 she was struck by a dive bomber and forced to return to port for repair. Upon completion of those repairs, the Indianapolis set out for her two most noteworthy tasks. First, she delivered the Little Boy, the first atomic bomb ever used in combat, and then about 2 weeks later, she went down after being torpedoed by a Japanese submarine. Unfortunately, the U.S. Navy did not realize the ship was lost until several days later. In the end, only about 300 of its 1,200 officers and sailors survived, making it the single greatest loss of life for any U.S. Navy ship at sea, which may be a little bit misleading because more people died on the Arizona, for instance, but the Arizona was in dock. So now I will gloss over some of the continued tragedy of the Indy's crew after its sinking, so this isn't too depressing. But the captain of the Indianapolis was later brought to court-martial for failure to adequately protect his ship. Namely, he was not steering in a zigzag direction, or in other words, it was the opinion of some that the Indianapolis was lost because she was driving in straight lines. So, don't drive in straight lines. But in all fairness to Captain McVeigh, both the commander of the submarine that sank the Indianapolis and the naval legend Chester Nimitz agreed that the maneuver would not have made a difference in the sinking of the Indianapolis, and the captain was restored to active duty following his court-martial. So, let's talk about this boat. For comparison purposes, I will be comparing this to the New Orleans, the Tech Tree, Tier 6 American cruiser, and when I do that, I'm going to get the largest difference between these two ships out of the way right up front. The New Orleans has a spotter plane, and the Indianapolis has sonar. In short, the New Orleans is probably better at spotting battleships and other cruisers over islands or smoke screens for extended periods of time, while the Indianapolis is better at spotting everything, at least for a short period of time, up to very nearly 10 kilometers. This makes the Indianapolis something of an unholy terror against destroyers because your smokescreen is not going to work with that radar. In terms of survivability, we're looking at 32,500 hit points. This is around 2,500 less than fully upgraded New Orleans. Your armor is a little bit better on the low end, a little bit worse on the high end, so maybe you take a little bit less damage from destroyer guns and secondaries, but you are a little bit easier to punch than the New Orleans. For artillery, we're looking at both ships having a main battery consisting of three 203mm guns in 3 turrets. Now, there doesn't appear to be any difference on paper between these guns, but one is a Mod 1 and one is not. I get the feeling when I've driven the Indianapolis that this ship has ever so slightly better armor penetration than the New Orleans, but if that's the case, it's a hidden stat that isn't here. The Indianapolis has very punchy guns, and I have seen people just citadel everything right, left, and center in this boat. Secondary armament for both ships is very similar. The New Orleans has it beat on range, but not by much, 0.5 kilometers. Overall, this gives the New Orleans a slightly higher artillery rating, but I'm not completely convinced. So we always talk about AA, even though it doesn't really matter right now. The New Orleans is definitely the better ship when it comes to the overall AA package. That said, the Indianapolis does have slightly greater range, so if you're looking at the 3.5 to 4.2 range, the Indianapolis is going to start shooting things the New Orleans is not. For maneuverability, you are looking at a slightly more maneuverable ship with a slightly less maneuverable rudder. So you're going to be able to make tighter turns, but it's going to take you a little bit longer to do that. In any case, the Indianapolis is not a very sluggish ship. It performs pretty well in terms of maneuvers. For concealment, the Indianapolis is actually easier to spot. Even though this has permanent camouflage on it, it is more detectable than a naked New Orleans, both by sea and by air. That said, I really do appreciate Warrior Gaming's attention to detail in putting the dazzle pattern on this ship, a camouflage that the actual ship wore during World War II. Alright, so here we go. We're jumping into a battle. We're going to be on Trident, and we're actually going to be following Savo, the man who made this video possible. He is going to be piloting our Indianapolis. I am in a division with him. You can see me in the Buisca up there. I'm not going to have too much of an effect on this game. Mostly, I'm going to chase a battleship around and annoy the piss out of it. So, I'm going to go ahead, flash up Savo's commander and his equipment choices. I am super jealous of his commander, to be completely honest. In terms of equipment, this is a completely reasonable build. I would probably go with concealment expert myself, but, you know, to each their own. That's probably actually helping him identify targets up to that 10-kilometer range with radar, and that will probably come up in this game. Another thing I will note is that Savo and I played several games together in this configuration, and I do appreciate that he sent me probably the most realistic version of what the Indianapolis can do, because there were definitely one or two games where he was scoring like 100 citadels or something just stupid, and you're not going to usually get that result, but this is a very, very punchy ship. So Savo's rolling out over towards A. I am also rolling out over towards A. One of the wonderful things about playing with somebody in a division, particularly if they have their head about them, is that you can kind of force multiply. There we go. Tactic Angels trying to capture A. At this point, Savo is starting to feel the heat, and one of the things you're going to note is he's going to play this pretty judiciously, pretty intelligently, because we are not top tier in this match, and there are plenty of tier 7 battleships that will do a lot of damage if you give them the chance. There's the King George V, and behind that the Iowa, everybody's favorite ship to hide from. So you see he's angling in on that Iowa. Good idea. He's already dealt one citadel. I'm sure he does not want to take another. And get in here on the last couple of seconds of the capture. That's good for your point total. In any case, he's putting some shells out there on that Iowa as it disappears. And doesn't look like he hit anything. So I'm a little bit surprised by that. Maybe I should bag this up and re-record it. No, we're leaving it in. We're leaving it in. I should know what happens in this. I was in this match. We've already established that. So anyway, he's stalking up on this King George V. Obviously, this corner is fraught with peril. He's putting some AP out there. Get some shatters, which isn't great. But, you know, what are you going to do? I think he hit the armor belt at just the right angle, and with the arc of the shells, it wasn't enough. He switched over to HE. He does have that fire starter ability from Norman Scott, so this is usually a little bit more effective than normal. But certainly that Iowa's starting to have several problems. And as you see the shells coming in from right to left, that is me annoying him with my destroyer guns. We've got one fire going on that Iowa already, and Savo's sneaking around this island one more time. This is one of the things that I'm talking about when I say this ship is not unmaneuverable, because I mean, this isn't World of Tanks. You can't rocket back and forth behind a rock like super fast or easy. But you see, this thing changes directions, changes speed relatively nimbly, considering the size of the boat. So there we see Savo gets spotted again by air, and then by sea. At this point, that Iowa is pretty well out of a threatening position. He can move around the side of this island and try to bring his guns to bear on another more squishy target. We've got AP loaded up here. That New Orleans is at the far end of the range. But, you know, these shells don't cost that much. Yeah, put about 2,400 damage in them. Not too terribly bad. The New Orleans is in a precarious position, though, whether or not it realizes it, because as he gets a little bit closer into range, you're going to start seeing a lot more of that. We score a second Citadel, and Savo's up to 21,000 damage. I find that this thing just punches cruisers like crazy. There you see several more Citadels, and Savo finishes him off, moving forward carefully, because of course they do have some Iowas floating about, and I think they also have a Vanguard, but that'll come in later. You can see my continued efforts to annoy that Iowa by essentially setting him on fire again and again, and at a range where he can't effectively deal with me. You know, not the most sexy game I've ever played, but somebody seems to think we should be going for somebody else. I'm like, you know what? We need to finish off this Iowa. Shoot the Iowa. We got several options, though, particularly for Savo, and here you're going to see a pretty good play. He's tracking this Fubuki. It's coming around on a battleship. Obviously, you as a cruiser have a certain duty to defend the battleships from the terrifying little destroyers. He's switched over to high explosive after a full salvo. That is a good idea. That Fubuki's starting to smoke up, and boom. He's within 10 kilometers. He's in the smoke. Savo pops the smoke, or pops the radar, and of course he has no defense whatsoever. Gets eliminated from the game. So that's a good play and counterplay. I think at higher levels the cruiser definitely has the stronger counterplay there, and that was pretty well perfectly executed. We're looking at another Iowa here. This is not the one that I've been harassing. This is his twin. Savo's right to keep high explosive here for all sorts of reasons, because that Iowa is a little bit angled, and he also put out one fire, which is an interesting choice. This is probably going to hurt. Yeah. So there you see kind of what I was talking about earlier. Also, if you do give a battleship the opportunity, or even another cruiser, you can be citadeled pretty rough in this little boat. Putting some more shells out there. That fire is going to stick because, of course, he doesn't have his repair kit. But at this point, there's a mounting number of people who can fire on our good ally here, and there's a full-strength Vanguard over that island. The enemy is down to just the 2 battleships, though, so overall, the crew, the ship, the team, one of those things has done pretty well in this. This is a little brave considering his HP situation, but certainly doing a lot of damage is a lot of fun. We see a bunch of pens. Those are the high explosive penning the front of the ship, where it is not very well armored. It's kind of at a far range here, but I mean, you can see he's getting pretty accurate hits all the way out on that Vanguard at max range, and actually doing a pretty solid bit of gunnery overall in terms of his hits and misses, at least in my book. Sometimes Tactic Angel drinks, though, so you know, his gunnery varies a little bit by blood alcohol content. More shells out on that Iowa. It looks like those are all winners, or mostly winners. 7. Like, look at the range there. 16 kilometers. He lands 7 of 9 shots on an Iowa. The Indianapolis has just fantastic gunnery, and some of that's because of his commander. Some of it is the boat itself. But unfortunately, Savo's luck has run out. Thankfully, he is among friends, and the rest of us are pretty much going to finish it off. Here you see me at the end of the game, for the most part, just playing spotter to the rest of these people. I'm going to think about trying to sink him with some torpedoes, but you know, the game's actually not going to last that long. So mostly just chasing this guy around. Now, Indianapolis, it's a great ship. Now, if I hadn't spent an unreasonable amount of money on this game already, I would definitely consider it. It is a lot of fun to play. It is a damage farm, and you can make a ton of credits in it. Once again, I would not suggest anyone who has not played up to at least Tier 5 or 6 consider purchasing a Tier 5 or 6 ship, and that goes for the Indianapolis as well. You are going to have to practice good situational awareness and good angling in order to make it work, but other than that, I consider it a very capable cruiser and a lot of fun to play. So as we close out this, you're going to see I'm going to start shooting at this guy basically because my torpedoes have missed by a country mile, and why not? Let's see the stats here. We can see how well Savo did, and you'll get a sense that, like, this was a pretty decent game. Not crazy outstanding. Savo's at the top of the list here for doing an overall just good job supporting his team. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Savo, again, for sending this in. I'll see you guys on the next one.